This is TWiT.
Apple is planning on combining, this is from Mark Gurman, who's very, very reliable at Bloomberg. Well, I think you know Mark pretty well, Seth.
I know Mark. I've heard of him.
Seth started Mark in his career when he was like 17, right, Seth?
It might have been even younger.
He was just a kid.
It was like, yeah, he's a tipster turned star reporter.
Yeah. I'm sure you're rooting for him, but still.
Absolutely.
He should be writing for 9 to 5 Mac.
Of course.
Not this Bloomberg. Anyway, he's kept his sources, apparently. He says Apple plans to come. This is interesting. The first thing I'd heard earlier was that Apple wants to encourage iPad developers to make their apps Mac compatible. And there's an SDK. It would require recompiling. Now Mark's saying that's this year. But going forward, by 2021, Apple plans to combine iPhone, iPad, and Macintosh apps. So there's one platform. Is that your understanding of this, Seth?
Well, I mean, so combine this with the news also this week that Macs are going to Apple chips. They're going away from Intel.
ARM-based, yeah.
ARM-based chips. I would assume that, Apple 8, 12, 13, 14, whatever. So you're kind of merging, really, the platforms at this point. So, looking 2 years out, you kind of see that the Mac is going to be kind of like an iOS device at that point.
Okay, Project
So,
Fuchsia.
That's Google's response to this is that we got to make our own operating system. That's not going to.
Didn't mean to interrupt, Seth.
No, that's ugly.
No.
That's ugly at this point.
Thinking...
This is a mature system, ecosystem.
Well, but
Right.
it's along the same lines.
Yeah. So the idea is by
pulling
2021,
everything
when you
together.
write an app, it will work on any of those 3 platforms. And you're right, Seth. Key to that is putting Mac on ARM.
Right.
Or
And
Apple's version.
And they're kind of like with Marzipan, they're kind of like, here's our roadmap, here's our 3-year plan, to get developers to write one app for both, most developers are writing for iOS because there's so many more people on iOS than Mac. So iOS apps will work on Mac, and then theoretically everybody comes over except maybe Parallels isn't going to work on non-Intel chips.
Right.
And, obviously Adobe's got a lot of work to do to get their desktop apps, the bigger, more complicated stuff that's got a lot of legacy Intel code. It's going to be hard, but, this is one of those things. This is like Apple going from PowerPC to Intel. It's just a transition over a period of time. And we kind of know, it's not official yet. We kind of know what that looks like. With Mark's reporting and others, it looks like we're about 3 years away from when it's fully engaged. And maybe this year, Tim Cook or somebody else kind of shows that roadmap a little bit better so that developers are really on board.
This is going to benefit the rest of us as well, because I am hearing Adobe is going to have to go in and do some work, and we have all these other suites.
But Adobe's working on it. They already have Photoshop's getting more and more capable. Lightroom's getting more and more capable, both on iOS. Adobe announced at their last conference that they were going to make a full Photoshop for iOS. Truthfully, a lot of the Pro apps are Apple's own apps. Final Cut, Logic, their Pages, and so I think Apple must have been working on this for some time.
How is it working out for Microsoft? Because this is what I was sort of clumsily referring to before. But I wonder how it's working out for Microsoft.
The history of this, you all know, the history of this is terrible. The idea of cross-platform apps is littered with strewn bodies. Remember Java Swing, the idea that you'd write once, Swing would give you a quote native UI on every platform. It was a disaster. I mean, everybody agrees. Actually, there's an interesting tie-in to this because Linus Torvalds showed his prickly side this week when he said, you have to be an idiot to think that ARM is going to make it in the server room. He says because developers want their software as a service applications to run the same platform they developed it on. They develop it on x86. They want it to run on x86. Nobody in his right mind really wants to do cross-compiling or, one size fits all. You write an application for native.
Right.
But this could be where Linus missed the boat, because if all of a sudden one of the biggest players, Apple, goes all ARM, maybe ARM servers are suddenly a very, very good idea for software as a service and progressive web apps and the other stuff. Maybe you are developing native. But I have to say, the conventional wisdom has always been you develop the best app is not the app you develop for both Android and iOS. It's the app you develop for that platform. An Apple app or an iPad app is not as good as if it's just an iPhone app. You need to develop specifically for that platform. How do you get around that?
I mean, it's a good question. I guess what they're hoping for in the long term is that, you're going to be developing on an iOS Mac or an iOS desktop device. So you're going to be developing iOS on iOS. Yeah. And that's got to be the idea. I don't have any other
like developing for Android
ideas
on the Chromebook.
I do see the benefit for Apple. Apple does not want to be. They've had to wait for Intel. And in fact, if you can criticize Apple for its slow development of a Mac Pro or new iMacs or new Mac Minis, it's because Intel just can't deliver. So they're sick of that. Qualcomm and Apple are in huge fight, suing each other, owing each other billions. Just, Apple, and Steve Jobs always said, by the way, it's his 64th birthday today. Steve Jobs always said, you make the software, you got to own the hardware. You got to do it both. And he always wanted to single source everything. He hates the idea. He hated the idea of going to Intel and buying chips. Messy. So, of course, there's a benefit for Apple, but the question is, but then is there a benefit for consumers? And are we going to be as happy? I know as a Mac user, I'm not looking forward to using my iPad for anything I use my Mac for. I've tried; it's a nightmare.
I'm smiling because it's my life with the Chromebook.
Yeah, you're kind of doing that.
I mean, theoretically, Apple has a couple years to bridge that gap, right. Make the iPad OS more like a Mac OS.
It was,
and in theory, eventually it'll be awesome, right? I mean, for the consumer,
in theory, eventually everything is awesome.
Yeah, exactly. In theory, everything is awesome.
But no, like I think about the way that I use, I'm an Android, and the way that I use essentially Google Drive, Gmail, all of that stuff, and the experience is fundamentally the same on my PC as it is on my phone, right? And this is kind of, in theory, this is what it looks like for the consumer, like across the board, no matter what you're using, right? And to me, that sounds great. Being able to, use Adobe products on my phone the same way that I do, or a similar way that I do on my machine. I mean, so many of us are doing that all the time anyway, as people who are working increasingly all the time. We're trying to open the thing on our phone instead of our computer, because our computer's not in front of us.
Right.
So in theory, it would be great to be able to have that experience.
Maybe Apple will make a foldable iPad.
Samsung's making the displays
We've
for
gone
them.
full circle.
So
actually, when I bought the iPad Pro, the new iPad Pro 12.9, that was exactly my experience, which is, this is the best hardware. This is hardware from the future. This is amazing. The processor is a desktop class, maybe even faster processor. The screen it's in every way, it was stellar hardware, and it was completely hobbled by iOS, which wasn't anywhere near as sophisticated. So they have some work to do.
Yeah, my understanding is iOS 13 this year is going to be a big step in that direction. I think
13,
they're going to have a
lucky number 13. It's a good number.
The rumor, Seth, was that they wanted to do this in 12, stepped back. Scott Forstall and others said, no, let's get 12 reliable.
I don't know if Forstall is still making those calls.
Maybe not Scott.
Yeah.
In fact, it was Scott Forstall that they got rid of so that they could do this and step back and say, let's make it reliable. And then in 13, we'll start taking those steps towards desktop computing.